Okay, here's an updated version of editing with Pixlr. I just want to show you the basic interface and some of the edits that you should think about performing. Uh, First of all, to bring an image into Pixlr, you click on Layer, Open Image as Layer, or on the screen at the beginning, it'll give you that option as well. Open Image from Computer. And you can select your image there. Once I have it in here, the basic interface is we have a navigator up in this corner, which allows you to zoom in and out on different areas in your picture. And this becomes really important when you're using tools like the clone stamp tool or maybe the eraser tool when you want to get really close or far away from the image. Sometimes you need to get really up close. Here's your layers. You're not going to use those so much in this editing, but you'll use it down the road. And your history. So every time you make a change, it'll show a change in here. So say for instance I use the eraser and I erase part of the image. You see that the eraser tool comes up, and then I can always go back to before I use the eraser. First, I'm going to do a image rotate. So up here you'll find a lot of your changes that you're going to need to make are going to be under the image menu. Might be the image size, might be the canvas size, and then you'll use that down the road. Image rotate, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. And there we go. And now I want to zoom back out a little bit. You can see on the screen here that when I rotated it, it made it a little bit smaller. Also under the image menu, you're going to have flip canvas one way or the other. And say for instance you wanted to flip it horizontally, you can flip it back. Okay, I'm going to use the first tool up here under tools. It's the crop tool. Most people are familiar with this. When you click and drag it out, it gives you the rule of thirds right here. And I want to place the waterfall right on the upper right hand corner of one of the rule of thirds, or more or less get it there. But I also want to have a little bit of the skyline, so I'm going to try and click and drag out enough so I get that waterfall. Actually, it's going to be more or less in the middle when I do it this way. Maybe I'll try putting it on this corner here and make the image a little bigger. I don't think I need to really crop a whole lot off of this image, but once you get it, just hit return, try it out, see if you like it. I think that looks good enough. I got kind of a cross corner composition going from lower left to upper right with the subject just off to the left in the upper rule of thirds. So next thing you're going to do is under adjustments. As a rule of thumb, I tend to go through these one by one to see if I can make the image a little better. Now, to the normal viewer, you'd think, oh, this image looks great, but you can improve it. So first thing, let's try and drop the brightness a little bit. It was kind of a bright day, and maybe up the contrast a little bit. We don't want to do it a whole lot. You're going to find that you can really overdo it quick, and it makes it too poppy. But we just want to punch this up a little bit. So I'm going to bring up the contrast a tiny bit, like 3 over, and then I brought the brightness down a little bit. That looks pretty good. Hit OK. Next thing under the adjustment menu is your hue and saturation. And if you feel like the colors are a bit dull, typically on a day that's really, really bright, your colors will get a little bit dulled out. So, if you brought them way up, you could see it makes things look like hypercolor. That doesn't look realistic, and it's kind of an easy fix. But it just doesn't really give you what you're doesn't give you any sort of level of realism. Next is the lightness, and you can see exactly what that does. This can be helpful if you've used a flash. Sometimes you got to drop the lightness of the image a little bit. Let me put mine back to 0. Okay. Next one is the adjustment menu for color balance. In our case here, we don't really need to change that, but you might have an image if you've taken a picture, say, in a room with a lamp, and the lamp is really yellow. You might want to offset that yellow by taking the red and upping the red, for instance. So you can use an opposite color to help pull that image back to a neutral color balance. You can do color vibrance as well, and that's very similar to saturation. But the next one I really want to show you is levels. This one is really, really helpful. And at first it's a little confusing. You get this image histogram here, and it tells you where your lights and darks are. And as a rule of thumb, I tend to say if there's a little gap between the end of the histogram and one of the end sliders, I know I need to bring that slider up to it. And let me show you what this does. If I bring this one up, of course, it makes my darks darker. But if I put this right at the edge of where that histogram begins, you can see it starts to get a little more dark, and it's not a whole lot, but it makes the image a little bit more light and dark balanced. Same thing here. I can pull my midtones up and make them a tiny bit darker or lighter. In my case here, I'm going to leave them as is. And then I see a steep spike right at the end of this one. I'm going to pull my lights down a little bit to kind of match up so they're even with that. You can also check the output levels if you want to make it overall a little bit more neutralized. Say for instance it might be a little bit overly bright and contrasty. You can pull this one down and or this one up. In my case, I'm going to leave those two alone at the bottom. You really have to use some judgment, but I'll show you here what it looks like in the end. If I hit OK, and if I go back to, on my History tab, I go back to right at the beginning, say my crop tool, you see how it looks kind of notably dull? And then if I go down and I click on the levels, it now has a lot more vibrance, and it has a lot more kind of even toning. So it's the darks are darks, the midtones are in fact midtones, and the lights are light. Last one I'm going to show you is a little bit confusing, but can be helpful. It's curves. And this histogram is very similar. All your lights are up here, your darks are down here, and your midtones are in the middle. Anything above the line makes it lighter, anything below the line makes it darker. So say for instance you want your lights to be a little bit darker, you can in fact click on this and drag them down. And say I want my midtones to be a little bit darker as well, you can click and add a node and you can drag it down, and now that really gives it some punch. You can add points to this thing all over the place and really mess with the curves, but the more you do that, the more kind of crazy the image looks. I suggest if you add a point, click and drag it off, and maybe only add 1 point. Okay. Hit OK. And under the image menu, you also have auto levels. If you click on that, it kind of does all that stuff for you. And I think the image looks pretty good when I just did auto levels. Let's go and see what my version compared to auto levels does. And all they did, it looks like in auto levels, was bring up my lights a bit. So you can always do auto levels as a quick fix. I just wanted to show you all of the possibilities. In the next video, I'm going to show you quickly how to use the clone stamp tool in Photoshop, but it's the same in Pixlr. And that tool, I believe, is right here. It's the clone stamp tool. You'll be watching it in Photoshop, but the principle is exactly the same. It's a way to kind of clean up your image. Okay, good luck.